The night was alive with the hum of mystery, the sky cloaked in deep indigo, stars veiled by a blanket of clouds. In the heart of the countryside, where the air felt heavier and the woods whispered secrets, stood a secluded estate known only as Blackthorn Manor. It was here that Elena arrived, her heart pounding with trepidation and curiosity. She had been invited by Lucien, a man whose name was murmured in aristocratic circles like a forbidden prayer. Tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to smolder with unspoken desires, he was a mystery wrapped in charm. Rumors surrounded him. Some whispered he was a recluse with a tragic past, others, that he was a dangerous man who dabbled in the occult. Elena couldn't resist the pull of his enigmatic aura. The grand doors of the manor creaked open as she stepped inside, her heels echoing on the marble floor. The air smelled faintly of roses and something more primal, something that made her pulse quicken. Lucien stood at the top of the grand staircase, his silhouette framed by the dim glow of a chandelier. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had ceased to exist. "Elena," he said, his voice a velvet whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "You came." Their initial conversation was a dance of words, laden with innuendo and tension. Lucien's presence was intoxicating, his every movement deliberate. Every glance a caress. He offered her wine, dark and rich like blood, and led her to a room bathed in candlelight. Shadows flickered on the walls, casting an almost ethereal glow around him. As the night deepened, so did their connection. Lucien spoke of his lonely life, of the loss that haunted him, but his words were laced with a passion that mirrored the fire burning in Elena's chest. She felt herself drawn to him, not just by his beauty but by the weight of his sorrow. The depth of his sixth kiss was electric, a collision of hunger and restraint. His lips were soft but commanding, his hands firm as they traced the curve of her back. The world outside the manor faded away, leaving only the two of them in their shared storm of desire, but just as her heart began to surrender, a sound shattered the moment, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the manor. Elena pulled back, her breath ragged. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucien's expression darkened, his eyes glinting with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "You shouldn't have heard that," he said, his tone both apologetic and ominous. Suspense thickened the air as he led her deeper into the house. Down a spiral staircase she hadn't noticed before. The basement was colder, the walls lined with books and artifacts that seemed older than time itself. At the center of the room stood an ornate mirror, its surface rippling like water. "This is my burden," Lucien confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. "A curse bound to my family, one that I cannot escape." Elena stared at him, torn between fear and the undeniable pull of her feelings for him. "What does it mean?" "It means I am not entirely human," he admitted, stepping closer. "I live between worlds, cursed to feed on the energy of others to survive. It's why I've kept my distance. I couldn't risk hurting you." The revelation should have repelled her. But instead, it ignited something deeper. Her love for him surged, unyielding and fierce. "I don't care," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." Their connection deepened that night, their passion consuming and raw. Lucien's touch was both tender and wild, as though he feared breaking her but couldn't hold back his own yearning. Elena gave herself to him completely, their bodies entwined in a dance of love and death. But as dawn approached, the curse revealed its claws. The mirror began to glow, and Lucien's features twisted in pain. Elena watched in horror as his form began to shift, his eyes glowing red, his teeth elongating. "Run!" he roared, his voice guttural and inhuman, but Elena didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer, her heart breaking for the man she loved. "I won't leave you," she whispered, placing her hands on his trembling form. The power of her love fought against the curse, her touch grounding him in a way he hadn't thought possible. As the first rays of sunlight spilled into the room, the curse retreated, leaving Lucien breathless and human once more. In that moment, they knew their love was both their salvation and their doom. A bond forged in the fires of passion and the shadows of darkness. Together, They would face the mysteries of the curse, their love a beacon of light in the abyss, and though danger loomed, suspense lingered, and their future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they belonged to each other, bound by fate, sealed with love. Lucien's chest heaved as he clung to the remnants of his humanity, his trembling hand brushing against Elena's cheek. Her touch had calmed the raging storm inside him, but the air between them was charged with unspoken danger. The sun's rays crept across the cold stone floor, illuminating the anguish in his eyes, the deep longing etched into every line of his face. "Elena," he murmured, his voice laced with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "You shouldn't have stayed. I could have hurt you." "You didn't," she whispered, her fingers lingering on his lips. "I don't fear you, Lucien. I never will." Her words ignited a fire that smoldered in the depths of his soul. He closed the distance between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both desperate and consuming. Their bodies pressed together, the heat between them a fierce contrast to the chill of the room. He lifted her effortlessly, laying her down on a velvet chaise, his weight pressing into her as their hands roamed with unrestrained fervor. His kisses traveled to her neck, his breath warm against her skin. She arched into him, her heartbeat racing as he explored her with reverence and hunger. But as her nails raked across his back, a faint glow from the mirror caught her eye. "Elena," he whispered, sensing her distraction. "Don't look at it." She tore her gaze away from the mirror and back to him, her chest rising and falling as the tension in the room thickened. "What is it?" "It's a gateway," he admitted, his voice raw. "To the place where my curse was born. It hungers for me, and now for you." Elena's breath hitched, but the fear only deepened her resolve. "Then we'll destroy it," she said, her voice steady. Lucien's laugh was bitter. "It cannot be destroyed. It binds me. Without it, I wouldn't exist." His confession hung in the air, and yet, the passion between them refused to be extinguished. They returned to each other, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. Love could defy the darkness that surrounded them. Lucien's touch became more urgent, his kisses devouring her as though she were his salvation, but the mirror began to pulse, a low hum vibrating through the room. Lucien froze, his eyes flashing crimson for a fleeting moment. "It's awake," he said, his voice a growl. The mirror's surface rippled like liquid, and a shadowy figure began to take form. Elena clung to Lucien, her body trembling as the room grew colder. The figure stepped out of the mirror, its presence oppressive and malevolent. It was a woman, her face beautiful yet twisted with malice, her dress flowing as if woven from shadows. "Elena," Lucien said, shielding her with his body. "Stay behind me." The woman's gaze landed on Elena, a cruel smile curling her lips. "So this is the one who tamed you, Lucien," she purred. "How quaint." "Leave her out of this, Seraphine," Lucien snarled. Seraphine's laughter echoed through the room, sending chills down Elena's spine. "You know the price of defiance," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You belong to me, Lucien. You always have." "No," he growled. "Not anymore." The tension in the room was suffocating, and yet, the bond between Lucien and Elena burned brighter than ever. He turned to her, his eyes softening despite the chaos around them. "Do you trust me?" he asked, "with everything?" She replied. He kissed her deeply, as though it might be the last time, before turning back to Seraphine. "If you want me, take me," he said. "But leave her." Seraphine smirked, her eyes narrowing. "Do you think love can save you, Lucien? That it can break the chains that bind you to me?" Elena stepped forward, her fear eclipsed by the fierce love in her heart. "Love is stronger than anything you could ever offer," she said, her voice steady. Seraphine's expression darkened, and the room seemed to tremble as the shadows around her grew. But Elena, their hands intertwining as a surge of warmth spread between them. The mirror began to crack, the glow around it fading. Seraphine screamed, her form disintegrating into mist as the power of their love shattered the connection between her and Lucien. The mirror exploded, shards flying in every direction, but none touched Elena or Lucien, When the chaos subsided, Lucien collapsed to his knees, his body trembling. Elena knelt beside him, cradling his face in her hands. "It's over," she whispered. "She's gone." Lucien looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and awe. "You saved me," he said. "No," she replied, her lips brushing against his. "We saved each other." The dawn broke over the horizon, casting its light into the room. For the first time in centuries, Lucien felt truly free. Together, he and Elena rose, their hearts entwined, ready to face whatever came next, bound by a love that had conquered even the darkest of curses. The morning sun bathed the remnants of the shattered mirror in golden light. Lucien and Elena lingered in the embrace of their hard-won triumph. Yet beneath the warmth of their union, a shadow of unease still stirred. Lucien's gaze lingered on the fractured glass, his jaw tightening. "Something feels incomplete," he murmured, his voice a soft growl as though the remnants of his curse whispered warnings too faint for Elena to hear. Elena's fingers brushed against his cheek, grounding him in her touch. "It's over, Lucien," she said gently. "She's gone. We're free." But freedom was an unfamiliar sensation for Lucien, its weight pressing down like a foreign burden. The echoes of Seraphine's haunting laughter still reverberated in his mind, intertwining with the memory of her shadowy form stepping from the mirror. He leaned into Elena's warmth, letting her presence steady the storm brewing within him. The tension between them didn't dissipate, it transformed, growing into something sharper, more intoxicating. As her fingers grazed the edge of his jaw, he caught her wrist, his grip firm yet tender. His crimson eyes locked onto hers, hunger flickering in their depths. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but at what cost? You've tied yourself to me, Elena. To everything I am. Everything I've done." Her response was swift, her lips finding his with a fervor that silenced his doubt. Her kiss was like fire. Fierce and consuming, as though it could burn away the last vestiges of his hesitation. Lucien gave in, his hands tracing her body with reverence, rediscovering her curves like an artist etching his masterpiece. Elena gasped as he lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the cool stone wall. Her legs wrapped around him, pulling him closer as their passion ignited into a blaze. His lips trailed down her neck, his breath hot against her skin as he claimed her movements primal yet charged with a love neither of them could deny. But just as their connection reached its zenith, the air in the room shifted. A sudden chill swept through, extinguishing the warmth of their embrace. Lucien froze, his instincts sharpening. Elena clung to him, her breath hitching as a low, menacing hum began to vibrate through the manor. "The mirror," Lucien whispered, his voice tinged with dread. Though it lay in shards across the floor, faint tendrils of shadow writhed among the fragments. The pieces pulsed, emitting a soft, malevolent glow. Elena's gaze darted to Lucien, her heart pounding. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lucien set her down gently, his muscles taut with tension. "She's not gone," he said, his tone grim. "Seraphine's essence still lingers. She's trying to reclaim her hold." As if in response, the shadows coalesced, twisting together to form a figure. It was Seraphine, no longer corporeal but still hauntingly beautiful, her spectral form flickering like a flame in the darkness. "Did you think it would be so easy?" she taunted, her voice a sultry purr. "You cannot break what is eternal, Lucien." Elena stepped forward, defiance burning in her eyes. "We defeated you once. We'll do it again." Seraphine's laughter echoed, a chilling sound that seeped into their bones. "Foolish girl," she hissed. "You've tethered yourself to him. And through him, to me. Every touch, every kiss, every moment of your love strengthens my power." Lucien snarled, his fangs elongating as his protective instincts surged. "You won't touch her," he growled. Seraphine's form flickered, her gaze settling on Elena with predatory intent. "But she already belongs to me. Just as you do." The room darkened further, the oppressive energy suffocating. But even as fear gripped her, Elena felt a surge of determination. She reached for Lucien, her fingers intertwining. Our connection, Elena said, realization dawning. But love isn't a weakness. It's our strength. Lucien's eyes met hers, a flicker of hope breaking through his despair. Together, they turned to face Seraphine, their bond forming an unbreakable shield. Elena stepped closer to the apparition, her voice steady. You don't control us. You never did. With each word, the light between Elena and Lucien grew, pushing back the shadows. Seraphine screamed, her form unraveling as the power of their love consumed her. As the last remnants of Seraphine dissolved into the ether, the room was bathed in an otherworldly light. Lucien pulled Elena into his arms, their foreheads touching as they caught their breath. She's gone, Lucien said, his voice thick with relief and awe. Elena smiled, her lips brushing against his. For good this time. Their passion reignited, their love burning brighter in the aftermath of their triumph. This time, their connection wasn't born of desperation but of hope, a promise of a future free from the chain. As she rose from his arms, Elena, he whispered, his voice trembling with equal parts hope and dread. Her ghostly figure stood before him, her eyes no longer filled with the warmth of life but with an unnatural light that flickered like distant stars. She reached out to him, her hand passing through his cheek like mist. I'm still here, she said, her voice layered with an otherworldly echo. But I'm not the same. Lucien staggered to his feet, his mind reeling. No, this isn't right. You're not supposed to. His voice broke, the words failing him. The manor itself seemed to react to her presence. The walls groaned as though in agony, and the shadows writhed, forming grotesque shapes that crawled along the edges of the room. Elena's form flickered, her once delicate features twisting with a fleeting malevolence before softening again. She's inside me, Lucien, Elena said, her voice strained. Seraphine's curse. It didn't leave. It claimed me instead. Lucien's chest tightened, his fists clenching as his rage and sorrow threatened to consume him. I won't lose you to her, he growled. I'll find a way to free you. I swear it. But Elena stepped back, her movements fluid and ghostly, her feet hovering just above the ground. You can't save me. I'm bound to this place now, just as you once were. The veil between life and death is thin here. She used me to anchor herself. Her words were punctuated by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the shadows. The darkness coalesced, forming a spectral version of Seraphine, her laugh resonating with bone-chilling malice. You thought you could banish me so easily? Seraphine sneered. She's mine now, Lucien. You'll never have her, not truly. Elena's form convulsed as Seraphine's presence flared, her translucent skin darkening with streaks of shadow. Her eyes turned hollow, twin voids that bore into Lucien's soul. Elena, fight her. He shouted, desperation laden. Trying, she gasped, her spectral hands clawing at her chest as though she could rip Seraphine's influence from her very being. Lucien's mind raced as he recalled the fragmented lore he had gathered over the centuries. There had to be a way to sever the connection, to free Elena's soul before it was consumed entirely. Elena, listen to me, he said, stepping closer despite the shadows lashing out at him. You're stronger than her. You have to remember who you are. Who we are. Her form flickered, the faintest glimmer of recognition lighting her ghostly features. Lucien. He reached out, his fingers brushing through her ethereal hand. I love you, Elena. That's something she can never take from us. The room exploded with light as Elena's spirit surged against the darkness within her. Seraphine's shrieks filled the air, the sound grating and otherworldly. As the two forces battled for dominance, Lucien could only watch, his heart pounding as Elena's form burned brighter, her love for him shining like a beacon. The shadows recoiled, and with a final, deafening scream, Seraphine's essence shattered, her presence dissipating into nothingness. Elena's form grew faint, her light flickering like a candle in the wind. She turned to Lucien, a serene smile gracing her spectral lips. I'm free, she whispered. But I can't stay. No, Lucien said, his voice breaking. There must be a way. She shook her head, her translucent hand brushing against his cheek. You gave me more than I ever dreamed of, Lucien. But my time is over. As her form began to fade, her final words echoed through the room. I'll always love you. And then, she was gone, leaving Lucien alone in the hollow silence of the manor, his heart heavy with loss but alight with the memory of a love that had transcended death. The silence after Elena's departure was suffocating. Lucien stood frozen in the desolate chamber, the faint warmth of her spectral touch still lingering on his cheek. The manor around him seemed to exhale, its oppressive darkness easing momentarily, but it was a hollow reprieve. He could feel it, the lingering stain of Seraphine's curse, writhing beneath the surface, waiting to strike. He clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms as the weight of his solitude bore down on him. She was gone. Elena, the light that had pierced his eternal darkness, had slipped through his fingers like mist. But as the minutes stretched into an eerie quiet, the silence fractured. A low, mournful wail echoed through the halls. A sound so piercing it chilled Lucien's undead heart. The air grew colder with each passing moment. Frost began to creep along the edges of the broken mirror, the shards glinting with an unnatural glow. The scent of roses decayed into the acrid tang of rot, and the faint outline of a figure materialized in the corner of the room. Elena? Lucien whispered, his voice raw with desperation. The figure turned, its form translucent and swathed in a shifting mist. It was her, Elena. But something was wrong. Her face, once radiant with love, was etched with torment. Her eyes, once warm, now burned with a spectral intensity that pinned Lucien in place. You let me die, her voice echoed. Layered with sorrow and something darker, Lucien staggered back, his mind reeling. No. I tried to save you. Her form flickered, her features contorting into something grotesque for a fleeting moment before returning to their familiar beauty. She drifted closer, her movements unnaturally fluid, her feet never touching the ground. You brought me here, she said, her tone heavy with accusation. You tied me to this cursed place. The shadows in the room deepened, elongating and twisting into claw-like shapes that reached for Lucien. The walls, their surfaces rippling with unseen life. The wailing returned, louder this time, a chorus of despair that echoed through the manor. Elena, listen to me, Lucien pleaded, his voice trembling. This isn't you. It's the curse, it's Seraphine's doing. But she didn't respond. Her form flickered again, and when she raised her hand, it was no longer delicate but twisted and clawed. She lunged at him, her movements inhumanly fast. Lucien barely managed to dodge, the spectral claw slicing through the air where his chest had been. Elena, fight her. He shouted, his voice breaking. Her laughter filled the room, a haunting sound that sent shivers down his spine. There is no Elena, she said. Her voice blending with Seraphine's sultry tones. Only what you've left behind. The walls of the manor groaned as if in agony. Blood seeped from the cracks in the floor, pooling at Lucien's feet. The temperature plummeted further, his breath crystallizing in the frigid air. He could feel the weight of countless spirits pressing in on him, their whispers an incomprehensible cacophony of sorrow and rage. Elena. He called out, his voice a desperate roar. Her form hesitated, flickering between its monstrous and familiar visage. For a brief moment, her eyes softened, and he saw her, the woman he had loved, Lucien. She whispered, her voice trembling. Help me. Determination surged through him. He wouldn't lose her again. Drawing on his vampiric strength, he stepped toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. I'll save you, he vowed, his voice steady. Even if it means destroying this place, I will free you. As he reached out to her, the shadows around her lashed out, coiling around his arms like serpents. They burned like fire, their touch searing through his undead flesh. But he didn't falter. Elena, fight her. He urged. You're stronger than this. You're stronger than her. Her scream pierced the air, a sound of raw agony and defiance. The shadows recoiled, their grip loosening as her form shone with a faint, flickering light, but the battle was far from over. The manor itself seemed to come alive, the walls pulsating as if fueled by the curse. The blood on the floor surged upward, forming grotesque figures that lunged at Lucien. He fought them off, his vampiric strength barely enough to hold them at bay. "Elena, you have to fight." He shouted over the chaos, her light grew brighter, forcing the shadows to retreat further. "Lucien," she said, her voice steadying. "I need you to let me go." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I won't lose you again." "You don't have a choice," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm already gone. But you can stop this. Destroy the mirror. End the curse." The mirror. His gaze darted to the shattered fragments, still pulsing with an unnatural glow. They were the source, the anchor that held Seraphine's curse, and Elena, bound to the manor. With a roar of determination, Lucien charged toward the shards, his fists pounding into the glass. The fragments cut deep, their edges biting into his flesh, but he didn't stop. The light within the shards grew blinding, and Seraphine's screams filled the air, her presence writhing in agony as her grip on the world was severed. When the final shard shattered, the room was consumed by a blinding light. The blood, the shadows, the whispers, all of it evaporated. Leaving only silence, Lucien collapsed to his knees, his strength spent. The air was still, the manor eerily quiet. He looked up, his heart aching as he saw Elena's form, faint and flickering. "Thank you," haunting reminder of the love that had fought to pierce the crimson veil. Lucien lingered in the silent ruins of the manor, the weight of loss suffocating him. The air, though free from Seraphine's curse, carried an unnatural stillness that crept into his bones. He couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, a shadow of what had transpired, pressing against the edges of reality. As he moved through the blood-stained halls, the broken mirror fragments crunching beneath his boots, faint whispers began to echo. They were soft at first, like a distant wind, but soon they grew clearer, calling his name. He froze, his vampiric senses sharp, scanning the darkness. "Lucien." The voice was unmistakable. "Elena." He turned slowly, dread curling in his chest. In the center of the grand hall, where moonlight filtered through shattered windows, her form began to materialize. She was no longer the tormented specter bound by Seraphine, but neither was she entirely herself. Her translucent figure shimmered, caught between this world and the next, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Elena," he whispered, stepping closer. "You freed me," she said, her voice soft but heavy with finality. "But the manor, it will not let me go." Confusion twisted his face. "What do you mean?" "The curse is broken." Her gaze dropped, and when she looked up again, tears glistened like liquid starlight. "The curse was only part of the darkness here. The manor itself is alive, Lucien. It feeds on pain, on despair. My death. Our love. It's claimed me as its own." A cold wind swept through the room, carrying with it the sound of distant laughter, low, guttural, and filled with malice. The walls began to shift, their surfaces rippling like water, and grotesque faces formed in the wood and stone, mouths twisted in eternal screams. Lucien reached for Elena, but his hand passed through her. The cold of her ghostly form burned worse than fire. "No," he growled. "I won't let this Can't fight it," she said, her voice trembling. "It's ancient, older than Seraphine's curse, older than you or me. It cannot be destroyed, only fed." The manor groaned, its walls closing in, the shadows deepening. The air grew thick, and the smell of decay returned, suffocating in its intensity. "Then I'll stay," Lucien said, his voice firm. "If it wants pain, it can have mine. I'll suffer for eternity if it means sparing you." Elena shook her head, stepping closer. Her spectral form flickered, struggling to remain whole. "That's not how it works. If you stay, it will take more than your pain. It will twist you, make you its instrument. You'll become like Seraphine, a vessel for its hunger." Lucien's mind raced. There had to be a way to free her, to destroy the manor once and for all. But before he could respond, the laughter grew louder, the shadows stretching toward him. Lucien, Elena said, her voice urgent. There's only one way to end this. You must burn it. Burn the manor, destroy every piece of it. Only then will I be free. His chest tightened. And you? Will you survive the flames? She smiled sadly, her form growing fainter. I'm already gone. This will be my end. But it will be peace. The thought of losing her again was unbearable, but the look in her eyes left no room for argument. She needed him to let go, summoning every ounce of strength. Lucien nodded. I'll do it. For you. Elena's smile softened, and for a moment, she was the woman he had fallen in love with. Thank you, she whispered, her voice fading like the wind. Lucien didn't hesitate. He tore through the manor, gathering anything flammable he could find. The shadows fought him at every turn, clawing at his flesh, whispering promises of power and eternal love if he would only stop. But he ignored them, his resolve unshakable. When the fire began, it was small, a flicker in the corner of the grand hall. But it spread, devouring the cursed wood and stone with an almost sentient hunger. The flames roared, their heat blistering even Lucien's immortal skin. As the fire consumed the manor, the screams began. Not human screams, but something far more primal, echoing from deep within the walls. The faces in the stone writhed, their mouths open in silent agony as the fire tore through them. Lucien stood in the center of the inferno, watching as the darkness was reduced to ash. He could feel the manor's grip loosening, its power waning with every crackling ember, and then, through the smoke and flames, he saw her one last time. Elena stood at the edge of the hall, her form glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She smiled, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. Goodbye, my love, she said, her voice carried on the wind. Goodbye, Elena, Lucien whispered, tears streaming down his face. Her form dissolved into the light, and for the first time in centuries, Lucien felt a weight lift from his soul. As the flames consumed the last of the manor, Lucien stepped into the night. The stars above were brighter than he had ever seen, and the air was clean, free of the taint that had plagued the cursed land. He turned back one last time, watching as the crimson veil was reduced to nothing but ash. The darkness was gone, and with it, the woman he had loved. But in her final moments, she had given him something priceless, redemption. And as he walked into the night, the whispers of the manor silenced forever. Lucien knew he would carry her memory with him for eternity.